Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. Anno Domini 1666 is a game published by Wargamer Games Studio, which transports us directly to the 17th century, to Vienna, and it enables us to fight duels between the Alexandre Dumas musketeers and the heroes of the Henryk Sienkiewicz trilogy. A duel between Skrzytuski and Aramis, or maybe between Wołodyjowski and Athos. All this is possible thanks to this game. Today I would like to show you the additional rules governing skills and special capabilities which the heroes and the characters of this game have. In this game, not only the most powerful and the most efficient character in combat will be the victorious one, because in order to win, you'll have to use all your skills and the palette of additional abilities that your characters have. So let's take a look at all those additional skills and how to use them during gameplay. Begging for mercy is a skill used only during close combat. A character having the skill, for instance the courtesan, can beg for mercy a good or neutral character winning a close combat. In order to beg for mercy, the losing character has to make a test using its own charisma against the winning character's fortitude. If the character winning the combat is good, an additional +2 modifier is applied. If the character is neutral, no additional modifier is used. You cannot beg for mercy bad characters. If you succeed during such a test, your character will not take any wounds. Additionally, it will not incur any additional negative consequences of losing, although it is prone. As long as it doesn't stand up, it cannot be attacked by the merciful character. Although other characters allied to the merciful character are not bounded by this decision and can still attack. Berserker is a skill used in combat. It is present in the core game, for instance on the Longinus or Porthos cards. A character having the Berserker skill is always treated as the attacker in combat, and it cannot avoid combat. In case of a fight between two characters having the Berserker skill, the attacker will be the one who is currently active. A fight between two characters having this skill cannot end in a draw. It is automatically treated as a riposte without having to spend any Parry tokens. Bribery is a capacity used as an attack, and it might be attempted while engaged. It doesn't require an inconspicuous marker at the same time. At the game start, we put a universal marker on the character possessing this capacity. This character can perform a partial action to try and bribe an enemy commoner on an adjacent space. Fortitude and intelligence of the target must be lower than 1. We do an opposing test of the character's charisma against the target's fortitude according to talking rules. If the test succeeds, the target is bribed. We put an unconscious marker on it, but if the test ended in a triumph, the target is immediately removed from the game and treated as killed. At the same time, after a successful bribe, we remove the bribe marker from the character. Call Me Uncle is a special skill of Zagłoba. Before the game begins, the player controlling Zagłoba can choose up to 2 commoners or 1 hero controlled by their opponent. The character or the characters receive 1 generic counter each. we can also place a counter on Zagłoba to remember that this skill is still in effect. Models with such a counter have a -1 modifier to all tests for the entire duration of the game. The sole exception are the fortitude test, which, in the case of having such a counter, have a +1 modifier. This effect lasts until the end of the game even if Zagłoba dies. In addition, Zagłoba and all the affected characters treat each other as friendly, regardless whether Zagłoba still has his Inconspicuous marker. Zagłoba may end this effect at any time. Charmer is a skill indicated on the character's card. This will be used during conversation with another character, so when using talking skills. What is important that this skill will grant some benefit only when talking to characters of an opposite sex. So for instance, Aramis, having the Charmer skill, will receive this bonus while talking to the courtesan, but he won't receive any when talking to a male character. During the conversation and during the test, if the first card revealed is a horse-hoe, the character using this skill will receive a +1 modifier. If the first card is a hut, the modifier will be +2, so it increases the chance of succeeding. Clever defense is a skill used in close combat, and it is found, for instance, on the D'Artagnan card. When such a character is defending in close combat, if the original card is black, you receive a +1 modifier to the combat total. Connections is a special capacity which is used before the game start, when creating our own band during the battle scenarios. When creating our own band, we will have to possess a certain number of connection points if we want to recruit certain characters which require us to have a certain amount of connection points. Concluding, when constructing our band, the number of connection points needed in our band has to be equal or lower than the number of connections points granted by the characters in our band. Cunning as a fox is a skill used during the initiative phase, and in the core game it is present, for instance, on the Zagłoba card. When both players already played their initiative card, either from their hand or from their deck, a player who has a character with the Cunning as a fox skill can draw one additional card from the deck. This card can be kept in their hand, or it can be immediately discarded in order to increase the value of their initiative card by +2. The rank and the suit of the card drawn has no impact on this modifier, it is just +2. If this is the first phase of the game and initiative is not determined, you just draw one card and keep it in your hand. Disarm is a capacity used in closed combat, and it can be found, for instance, on the Wołodyjowski card. A character possessing the Disarm capacity in close combat can disarm its opponent. It is possible if during combat it inflicts at least one wound to the hands. If this happens, the target, who has to be a commoner, has to take an agility test with a difficulty level of 6. If it fails, it immediately loses the close combat weapon that it used during combat. If this was the only weapon that such a character has, it is immediately eliminated. If it had any other weapons, it can still use them in future combats. We count only melee weapons, so ranged weapons won't be taken into consideration. Divination is a capacity which we can find, for instance, on the Gypsy card. Divination is a full action. The divining character may not be prone, unconscious, or engaged. The controlling player draws a number of cards from the magic deck, corresponding to the character's divination rating. Then picks one of them, checks its value in the divination table at the end of this rulebook, and applies the given effect. The overdrawn magic cards are discarded. Resolving exactly one card is always mandatory. The cards are silent may only be picked if all drawn cards have this effect. Additionally, a character receives 2 movement points to spend. Drawing and resolving the divination may be performed at any moment, before, after, or during the movement. Elusive target is another defensive capacity, and it is present, for instance, on the Urchin card. Shooting tests against such a character receive a -1 penalty. This special rule will not work if the character having this capacity is prone or unconscious. Faith is a capacity which we can find, for instance, on the Aramis card. This capacity has 2 effects. Firstly, we put a generic counter on the character, and this generic counter can be discarded before attempting any test. If we do so, we use our faith level instead of the tested skill or ability's value. Such a counter can be retrieved if we reshuffle our deck. The second option to use this capacity is to do a partial action, prayer. If an enemy is currently casting a magic spell, we can draw as many magic cards as our faith indicates, and add them towards the spell's failure or discard them. Fast is a trait present on certain weapon cards. A character using such a weapon receives a +1 combat modifier during close combats, during riposts, regardless of who parried. Firearm is not a character's capacity, it is a special rule governing certain weapons. It is described on the weapons card, indicating that this is a firearm. If the scenario uses alarm tokens, after each use of a firearm, we discard one of those tokens, even if the shot missed. Frenzied attack is another close combat skill, and it is also present on the D'Artagnan card. When such a character is the attacker in close combat, it receives a +1 modifier to its combat total if its original card is red. Frigid is a skill present, for instance, on the Athos card. A character having the Frigid skill is immune to seduction skills, so for instance it is protected against the courtesan skill. When such a character is involved in an opposed test required by a talking skill, opponents may not gain any positive modifiers due to skills or special rules. Their total is the sum of the ability score and of the card or of the cards played. Frigid is therefore a defensive skill. Gambling is a capacity used before games start, and it is present, for instance, on the Gypsy card. Before buying additional equipment, you can draw a number of magic cards equal to the sum of gambler ratings on all your characters. The suit of each card has a special effect. If you draw a skull, you have one fewer Kreutzer to spend, so this is a negative result. If you draw a cup, there is no effect. If you draw a heart card, you get one more Kreutzer than normally to spend on additional equipment. If you happen to draw a horse hoe, you can spend 2 more Kreutzers to buy additional equipment before the game begins. Huge is rather a character's trait, not a capacity. It is also a negative one, because having such a trait, as for instance Longinus, means that such a character cannot perform the climb through a window maneuver. It doesn't have any other option than to find a door. Inconspicuous is one of the most complex character abilities in the core game. A character having this ability starts the game with an inconspicuous marker. The character may voluntarily discard it at the beginning of its activation, both during the action or combat phase. The marker is also discarded if one of the following things happen. If the character has a weapon without the eye symbol in its hand, and it is within line of sight of an enemy character. Secondly, if the character decides to attack an enemy character. This includes both close combat as well as ranged attacks or any skills with the attack keyword. The marker is also discarded if the character is within 6 spaces and in line of sight of an enemy hero with wits or intelligence equal to or higher than our inconspicuous rating. All enemy characters within 6 spaces of our character and in line of sight can also attempt to recognize our inconspicuous character. This requires a spotting full action, which may be attempted while engaged, and a wits or intelligence against charisma opposed test. Once the marker is lost, it may not be recovered. What are the benefits of having an inconspicuous marker? Firstly, the character may attempt a surprise attack. An attack performed by a character who discarded their inconspicuous marker receives a +1 to the test if it is a ranged attack, or a +2 if it is a close combat attack. It may not be parried. Surprise attacks, both when we speak of ranged and close combat, may be done only with weapons with the eye symbol. This effectively is possible only once per game because when a character attacks, it loses its inconspicuous marker. Secondly, a character having this marker counts as friendly to all other characters, including opponent-controlled characters. So we may, for instance, ignore the zones of control. Additionally, having the inconspicuous marker enables you to do some other actions which require having such a status, for instance, using the pickpocket ability. On the other hand, a character having the inconspicuous marker cannot support its partners during close combat. Iron Parry is a capacity which we can find, for instance, on the Skrzetuski card. A character having this capacity may ignore an opponent's weapon's mighty blow rule. This is, therefore, a defensive capacity. Jostling is another close combat skill, and it is present, for instance, on the Porthos card. During close combat tests, the opponent's bonus for supporting characters is decreased by the character's strength, but not lower than 0. Leadership is a skill which is not present on any of the character cards in the core game of Anno Domini 1666. For the sake of this example, let's assume that D'Artagnan possesses this skill. Each commoner which is at a distance of up to 6 spaces will receive a +1 modifier to its fortitude skill, but not to a bigger number than 2. At the same time, this additional modifier can be granted only to characters which can trace line of sight to their leader. So, in this example, the character standing behind the wall, although at a distance lesser than 6 spaces, cannot trace the line of sight to its commander, so it cannot get any benefit from its commander's modifier. Living barricade is a capacity which hinders enemy movement. It is present, for instance, on the Longinus card. A character having this capacity has a zone of control which cannot be ignored for the purposes of movement, even if it is engaged by other characters. Lockpicking is a capacity which is present, for instance, on one of the Thieves cards. The door in Anno Domini 1666 can be in 3 different states. Doors can be open, closed, or locked. Locked doors can be opened by characters possessing the lockpicking skill. A character possessing this skill can attempt a lockpicking test with a difficulty level of 6. This is a full action, so you need to use your turn to do it. If the test is passed, the door becomes unlocked and opened. If the test is failed, nothing happens. But on a misfortune, if the scenario uses the peace rules, peace immediately ends. Mighty Blow is a capacity which can be found both on weapon cards and on character cards. If it is written on a weapon card, in order to use it, you have to use the weapon. If it is written on a character card, you can use it alongside any close combat weapon. If you're using a weapon in close combat and using Mighty Blow, your opponent may not parry if your strength is greater than theirs. Natural is an item trait which is not present in the core game of Anno Domini 1666. It is present in the expansions. An item having this trait may not be removed from the owning character. It may still be ignored by special rules though. You cannot parry with weapons having that skill. Parry is a special weapon trait present on certain cards. A character using such a weapon, even in the offhand, receives a positive or negative modifier to parry tests in accordance to the number indicated on the weapon. Pickpocket is a special skill which is present, for instance, on the Urchin card in the core game. This is an attack ability, but it requires an inconspicuous marker. If the character has an inconspicuous marker, it may attempt the pickpocket partial action in the action phase. You have to target an adjacent character and make an opposed agility versus wits test. If the test fails, you lose the inconspicuous marker. If you succeed, you can steal a special scenario item or an item that is specifically labeled as eligible for stealing, which is in the character's possession. Additionally, if the action succeeds, you obtain 1 movement point which you can immediately spend. Poisoner is a capacity used before the game starts. Each time, a character having this capacity has also a certain number which indicates the number of poison tokens that we can acquire. Such poison tokens can be added to weapons in our band. It not necessarily must be the weapons carried by the poisoners. It can be attributed to other members of our band. Quick reload is a capacity which is extremely useful for characters using ranged weapons. When such a character takes a reload action, make an unopposed fortitude test with the difficulty level indicated on the weapon. On a failure, resolve the reload action normally, without any negative consequences. On a success, however, if the reload counter was on the 2 pip side, you may immediately discard it instead of returning to the 1 pip side. This enables you to have a weapon ready to be shot much quicker. Quick Slash is another close combat capacity. It is present, for instance, on the Wołodyjowski card. A character having this capacity, if being an attacker in close combat, gains +1 to the combat total. At the same time, if it wins the combat, we reduce the damage inflicted by such a character to -1, but not below 0. Seduction is a powerful capacity used as an attack. In order to use it, the character, for instance a courtesan, has to possess an inconspicuous marker. During the interaction phase, this character may make an opposed test, Charisma versus Fortitude, against a single adjacent enemy character of the opposing gender. If the test is successful, we can remove both characters from the game. They both count as killed, but do not remove alarm counters. On a failure, nothing happens. Such a test may only be attempted against a given character once per game. This is important because although the test itself requires to have an inconspicuous marker, it doesn't use it. The marker, if the test fails, still stays with the character having this capacity. Stealth is a capacity used during movement. Enemies with wits lower than the character's stealth rating may not use the Overwatch counters to interrupt their activation if the movement started outside their line of sight. Such a character's activation do not end peace if the movement begins and ends outside enemy line of sight, and the character passes an unopposed stealth versus wits test when entering their line of sight. Sweeping attack is a powerful capacity which we can find, for instance, on the Longinus card. If such a character wins a close combat and deals at least 1 damage, it can immediately attack another enemy this character is engaged with. We do not play a new combat card for this character, and we use the original and reinforcing cards played for the first combat. The new enemy, however, must play a new combat card. You may keep attacking subsequent enemies for as long as we keep winning and inflicting at least 1 damage to our opponent. Each subsequent combat suffers a cumulative -1 penalty, and each enemy may only be attacked once per combat phase. If an enemy successfully parries our attack, we cannot use this capacity to attack another opponent during the same combat round. Tactician is a very useful capacity which we can find, for instance, on the Athos card. A character having this capacity can grant us two benefits from which we have to choose one each turn. Firstly, once per initiative phase, after playing a card for the initiative, we can draw one additional card from our deck and then choose the card that we want to use to determine initiative. The second option, which we can use once per action phase, is a partial action to draw two cards to our hand. We then must discard one of the cards, or two if we have more than 7. Thrust to the heart is a combat ability. It is present, for instance, on the Aramis card. In close combat tests, a character having this ability obtains an additional +1 modifier to its combat test if the first card played is a heart. The same applies to the amount of damage, which is also increased by 1 if the original first card played was a heart. Unswerving is a character skill present, for instance, on the Athos card. A character having that skill, during fortitude tests, both opposed and unopposed, after revealing the cards, can play an extra card from the top of their deck. We can then use this card instead of the original one. Unwieldy is an item trait which is present, for instance, on the soldier's sword in the base game. A character using a weapon with this trait receives -1 to his combat total during riposts, regardless of who parried. Wealthy is a skill which always indicates a certain amount of money. When fielding such a character, you receive the amount of additional kreuzers indicated on the character's card. Those kreuzers can be then used with your standard money reserves in order to buy additional equipment, which you can give to your own band and increase its efficiency. This ends this short preview of the skills included in the core game of Anno Domini 1666. As you might have seen, a lot of them are included in the base game, but this list is far from being closed, because in expansions, new skills, new traits appear, and they further enhance this very rich universe created by Wargamer Games Studio. I will present you other movies about this universe and about this game, presenting you the rules and also some gameplays of this title. Anno Domini 1666 is a game full of chrome, full of climate, full of interesting characters, and with a great potential to be further enhanced. I invite you to take a look at the different editions of this game, at the different expansions. You might find something interesting. Additionally, I invite you to take a look at our other material. You can check also our Facebook and Instagram accounts. Have a fantastic day and see you next time.